Chapter 5 is evaluating art. So what makes an artwork worthwhile? Is it visually interesting? Does it move our feelings? Is it skillfully done? And who is qualified to judge this? There are many ways to judge the quality of art. Our assessments are usually connected to the values and preferences that embody our deep-held beliefs. We naturally select one thing over another. We constantly evaluate. An artist selects and evaluates each component of their art. A viewer completes this artwork by recognizing the quality of the art. So how do we determine quality? Quality is very relative, and it varies from person to person. In Mexico, before the Spanish conquest, your artwork was considered good if it resembled the Toltecs, which was an ancient admired neighbor. In traditional Chinese art, your artwork is considered good if it communicates the spirit of a subject. It goes beyond the outward representation of a subject. In Europe, the tradition of art was pretty unchanging until the late 18th century, when a style differed so radically from its predecessors that it was very hard to accept. This was known as the Impressionism. We see an example of this painting here. Even though it was rejected when it first came about because it was so different, today it's honored in museums and sought out by public all over the world. So how do we realize what is good about artwork? What is quality about artwork? How can we put aside our subjective opinions? There are people who are known as art critics, and this is their job, and they make these discriminating judgments about art. But they are very knowledgeable, and they are very knowledgeable in three major areas, and they each coincide with a different theory for criticizing art. There's the formal theory, and this focuses the attention on the composition of the artwork and how it may have been influenced by other artworks. And so for this, a critic would ask, how is the artwork made? Is the composition put together to create a visual experience? The most important influence on an artist for these critics is other artwork that the artist has seen or studied. The subject matter or theme of the artwork is a lot less important than this, and these critics want to know when the artwork was created to compare it to other artworks. Next, there's the contextual theory, and these critics consider art as a product of a culture and a value system. And so these artists look at environmental influences such as the economic system, cultural values, and politics, and what else was going on during this time period in history outside of the art world. And so these artists favor works that embody important cultural values or express resistance to them. And the third theory for art criticism is the expressive theory, or artist-centered theory. And these critics pay attention to the artist's expression of personality or worldview. And so this critic would want to know about the skill level, the personal intent, the emotional state, the mindset, the gender, and so on about the artist. They're going to ask questions about who made it and who are these people that made the artwork. And so they're interested into personal, deep meanings, psychological insight, and this profound kind of human concern that you see in a lot of artwork. And so, as you notice, all of these theories will require some type of research. You're not going to just be able to look at an artwork, more than likely, and know about these different theories and be able to criticize them. For formal theory, you can tell us how a composition is made. You can talk about the different elements and principles. But in order to know about what artwork influenced it, you're going to have to do some research about art history for the formal theory. For the contextual theory, you're going to have to research about what was going on in history. And for the expressive theory, you're going to have to do some research about the artist that created the artwork. And so it's not really important for the expressive theory for you to post what you think the artist is expressing or what you think the artwork means. What you have to do is actually get in there and do some research about the artist and find out what their true intentions were and if they express that. So your textbook kind of goes through a few images and breaks it down to these 3 different theories, and so I thought I'd do that on a much smaller scale and do maybe just a point for each type of theory. And so every artwork can be approached based on all 3 of these theories. And so this is a piece by Titian, the Pietà of 1576. It's all on canvas. And so as a formal theory, we would know that this composition is very innovative because of its brushstroke. It's much more bolder and looser, much more expressive than other artists are using at this time. The composition is also innovative because it has an empty center. At this time period, usually the most important piece of the composition is in the center of the painting, and we see this empty center surrounded by these kind of diagonal lines created by the figures. Contextually, we would do some research and realize that altarpieces were very important during this time, and this was also during a plague. And so this artist is using the theme of mortality and grief. This vacant niche in the center is supposed to symbolize death, and Jesus' death is used to comfort the deaths of those of the plague. And so those who are dying or have friends or family member dying is supposed to comfort. And so this is based on current events of the plague that people are going through during this time period. For expressive, we would do some research and realize that this was the last year of Titian's life, and so it's basically this somber reflection of death. He's dealing with this idea of grief and mortality in his own life, and so he actually paints himself into the painting. He is in the lower right in red. And so we could also do some research and realize that he is referring back to kind of old age styles, how they depict it in your book. And so he's painting differently now that he's older than how he painted early on in his life and in his career as an artist. This is a painting by Delaney Turk, Simultaneous Contrast, 1913, oil on canvas. So formally, we would do some research and realize that this painting was influenced by Cubism of this time period, but it's a little bit different because the images, these kind of flat planes, these abstract shapes are not overlapping. They actually fit together like a jigsaw. And each module here is kind of shaded where it looks like it's three-dimensional or curved out towards you. And we would also know that it's very innovative because of the bright colors that she is using in this painting. For contextually, this critique is a little less interesting as far as the painting goes because there's not a lot depicting this time period. It's just a simple landscape, so it doesn't tell us a lot about this time period. But the title does. Simultaneous contrast actually alludes to an optical perspective theory that was studied during this time period, which is basically studying the interactions of color when they're placed alongside each other and how they interact with the viewer's eye. And so that's going to connect us to that time period contextually. And then expressive, we can look at her bright color palette, and if we research a little bit about her and her life, we realize that she grew up in Ukraine, and so these colors are the same colors that she would see of costumes from the dancers in Ukraine during her childhood, and so she's bringing that bright expressive color into her painting. And the last piece we're going to talk about is Basquiat's Horn Players from 1983, so it's a little more contemporary. And it's acrylic and oil paint stick on 3 canvas panels. And so formally we would know that Basquiat learned how to be an artist for making graffiti, and there were a few artists at this time that actually were doing this. These 3 vertical panels were actually influenced by Japanese screens. And the composition is barely hanging together, but the repetition of the heads, the boxes, and the white brush strokes kind of pull this entire composition together. Contextually, we would realize that this was a homage to the bebop movement and jazz during this time period. In the upper left, we have an image of Charlie Parker, which he is associating with Van Gogh, where you see the ear and the arrow kind of pointing away because Van Gogh cut off his ear. And so he's making an association that Charlie Parker is as innovative in the jazz world as Van Gogh was in the visual arts world. And then in the center, we see the name Dizzy Gillespie, and we see a picture of him with his trumpet on the right. And so he was a very influential jazz musician during this time period, and actually recorded some music with Basquiat, which was called the Ornithology. And so we see that repeated throughout this panel also. An expressive, we see that he's trying to express this personal history as an African American artist by examples from African American musicians. And we also see in the composition that we see this very intentional and intense line, but it's contrasted with this very casual arrangement. And so he's actually trying to express how he feels when he listens to jazz music. And so this very intentional and intense, but very casual at the same time. And so he's actually depicting that in this painting.